Hi everyone, this is Cooking with Kurt. Today my husband Donald and I are going to show you how to make pain à l'ube from scratch. These are essentially ube croissants, aka a Filipino twist on the beloved French pain au chocolat.
These are flaky and buttery pastry rolls stuffed with ube halaya, and they are amazing. C'est magnifique!
We recommend doing this recipe over 3 days. It's definitely a commitment making these pastries, but the end result is absolutely worth it. We're going to start by making the dough. In French, this is called la détrompe.
In the bowl of your stand mixer, add in 1.5 cups of milk, 1/4 cup of granulated sugar, and 2 1/4 teaspoons of instant yeast, which is an entire packet as it's sold here in the US. With a paddle attachment, mix this together on medium speed for about 5 minutes to ensure that the yeast gets completely dissolved. Stop the mixer occasionally to scrape down the bowl as needed. Stop the mixer. Add in 2 teaspoons of salt, 2 cups of all-purpose flour, and 4 tablespoons of unsalted European-style butter that's been softened. Mix on low-medium speed just until the mixture is combined. Stop the mixer. Scrape down the paddle attachment and the sides of the bowl. Avoid over-mixing this dough in general.
On that note, once flour is added, it's important not to overwork the dough, as this may overdevelop the gluten structures in the dough and make it resistant to rolling into thin layers. And you'll see later on why this would be an issue once we're laminating the dough with butter.
So unlike our brioche or ensaimada dough where we kneaded it a lot to promote gluten development and create an elastic, stretchy dough, you only want to mix this just until all the ingredients are combined. Add an additional 2.5 cups of all-purpose flour and continue mixing on low-medium speed with the paddle attachment just till the dough starts to pull away from the sides of the bowl. Stop the mixer and scrape down the paddle attachment and the sides of the bowl. Switch to a dough hook attachment and knead the dough on low-medium speed just till it starts to look smooth. As Kurt mentioned earlier, avoid over-kneading the dough as you want to minimize formation of gluten structures which make the dough tough. Stop the mixer as soon as it looks like this. Take a clean bowl and lightly grease it. Transfer the smooth dough into the greased bowl and cover with plastic wrap. Leave the dough at room temperature for 1 hour. After 1 hour at room temperature, place it in the fridge and refrigerate for a minimum of 8 hours to overnight.
Once the unlaminated détrompe dough has been in the fridge overnight, it's time to prepare the butter block to layer into the dough. This is called le beurrage. Take 24 tablespoons or 3 sticks of cold, unsalted European-style butter and cut them in half lengthwise so you end up with 6 long pieces of butter. Take a large piece of parchment paper and lay it on a clean, flat surface. Measure out 8 inches by 8 inches on the piece of parchment paper and fold the sides of the parchment paper up so that you have sort of an 8-inch by 8-inch shaped envelope. Your piece of parchment paper should be big enough that the folded up sides cover the 8-inch by 8-inch square completely. Open up the 8-inch by 8-inch shaped envelope and place the 6 pieces of butter next to each other in the middle of the parchment paper square. Fold up the sides over the butter to enclose the butter, and turn the square over so the smooth side is on top. Let the butter warm up a bit so that it's malleable. When the butter has softened a bit, gently roll the butter with a rolling pin till the 6 pieces of butter start to blend into each other. Continue rolling and massaging the butter with a rolling pin till it reaches the edges of the folded parchment paper envelope, so that the butter makes a square that is 8 inches by 8 inches and has an even thickness throughout. Place this in the fridge till ready to use. The next step is laminating the dough, which means folding the butter into the dough or doing turns, resulting in multiple dough, butter, dough layers. This is arguably the tricky part of making croissant pastry dough, but we're going to give you plenty of tips to maximize success for this process. Lightly flour a clean surface. Take the détrempe dough out of the fridge and roll it into a square that's 12 inches by 12 inches. If the dough is too cold or firm to roll, let it sit at room temperature for a few minutes to warm up and soften. If you have a half sheet pan, you can use it to approximate a 12 by 12 inch square. Line the sheet pan with parchment paper. When you've rolled out your dough a bit, place it in the sheet pan and continue to roll out the dough so that it's flush with two of the corners and approximately 12 inches by 12 inches. Cover this square of dough with plastic wrap and leave it in the fridge for 1 hour for the gluten structures to relax a bit. After 1 hour, take the 12 inch by 12 inch dough and the 8 inch by 8 inch beurrage block out of the fridge. Using a pastry brush, brush off any excess flour from the top surface of the dough. To laminate the dough and the butter should be cool but also soft and pliable during the lamination process. If either of them are too firm, let them sit at room temperature to warm up a bit. They should feel somewhat pliable when you press into them with your finger. If you have a digital thermometer, the butter should ideally be between 55 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit when folding and rolling. Place the 8 inch by 8 inch square of butter in the middle of the dough at a 45-degree angle by inverting it onto the dough while still on the parchment paper so that it looks like a diamond beurrage inside the détrempe square. The butter will be somewhat stuck to the parchment paper, so you can use the parchment paper to get the right placement. Then peel off the parchment paper. One by one, fold the 4 flaps of dough into the center of the butter, stretching the dough a bit, and pinch the dough together to seal the butter inside. Lightly flour the counter surface as well as the top of the dough, and roll the dough into a rectangle that's 10 inches by 20 inches. Use the rolling pin to create soft impressions along the dough to stretch the dough evenly into an elongated rectangle. Then roll it to even it out. Do your best to make it a perfect 10 inch by 20 inch rectangle with straight edges and 90-degree corners. Before folding, use a pastry brush to brush off any excess flour on the top surface, as excess flour will prevent the layers from sticking together. Fold 1/3 of the dough into the center. Pat it down so that the 2 layers stick together. Brush off any excess flour from the top surface of this fold, and then fold the opposite end over and onto this first fold. This is called a letter fold, as it's like folding a letter. Again, try to make everything neat and make the edges line up as much as possible. Pat down the folds a bit to compress the layers together, place it back on a parchment paper lined sheet pan, and cover with plastic wrap. Place it in the fridge for 1 hour for the gluten structures to relax a bit. The more you manipulate dough, the more gluten structures are formed and the dough becomes tougher to roll into thin layers.
The 1 hour rest time in the fridge also allows the butter to get cold and firm up again.
That's right. If the butter becomes too warm, it will melt into the dough and you won't get the flaky texture in the final pastry. After 1 hour in the fridge, take the dough out and let it sit at room temperature for a few minutes to soften and become malleable again. Lightly flour the counter surface as well as the top of the dough. Rolling the edge that's already longer to 20 inches, roll it out into a 10 inch by 20 inch rectangle again, using the same technique as before. Use a pastry brush to brush off any excess flour on the top surface. Fold the short 10 inch edges towards the center so that they meet at the center but don't overlap. Brush off any excess flour from the top surface of these folds. Where the edges meet at the center, fold the dough in half like you're closing a book. This is called a book fold for obvious reasons. Gently pat and press the dough a bit to compress the layers together and make sure all the edges are neat and aligned. Place the dough back on the parchment paper lined sheet pan, cover this tightly in plastic wrap, and leave it in the fridge for a minimum of 8 hours to overnight.
On the 3rd and last day of the process, we're going to form the rolls. First, we're going to prep the ube filling. Take a small bowl, add in 1.5 cups of ube halaya, 1 teaspoon of ube extract, and 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Mix this together until everything is well combined. Transfer this ube mixture into a disposable piping bag or Ziploc bag, cut a 1/2-inch size hole at the tip, and set aside at room temperature. Take 2 large sheet pans, we use 13 by 18-inch pans, and line them with parchment paper.
Now that the ube filling is ready, we're ready to form the rolls. Take the dough out of the fridge and divide it in half. Leave 1/2 in the fridge while working on the other half. Flour a clean flat surface, as well as the top of the dough. With the first half of dough, roll out a rectangle that's 8.5 inches by 24 inches. Try to keep the edges as straight as possible and the dough as evenly thick as possible throughout. To ensure that the dough isn't sticking to the surface, sprinkle additional flour as needed and feel free to move the dough or flip it while rolling. When you have your 8.5 inch by 24 inch rectangle, using a pizza cutter, cut off about 1/4 inch of dough from the long 24 inch sides. This will expose the butter layers so they're visible when the dough is rolled up into cubes. If you don't have a pizza cutter, cut with a knife using straight downward and lifting up motions rather than sawing or dragging motions, as that may lock the layers of butter and prevent seeing the definition after baking. Then with a pizza cutter, cut the 8-inch side in half down the middle, and cut the 24-inch side into quarters, resulting in 8 smaller rectangles that are 4 inches by 6 inches. Brush excess flour from both sides of these rectangles so that the dough sticks to itself when rolling. Take one of the 4-inch by 6-inch rectangles, pipe ube filling along one of the 4-inch ends, and again around the halfway mark. Do this for all 8 rectangles. Then roll the rectangles up into a tube. Place them on the prepared sheet pan with the seam side down so it doesn't unroll. Make sure to leave plenty of room between each roll on the sheet pan. Do the same thing with the other half of the dough in the fridge. There should be enough ube filling from the 1.5 cups of ube for all of the rolls. You'll end up with a total of 16 rolls, with 8 rolls on each sheet pan. Loosely cover the rolls with plastic wrap. Let them proof at room temperature for 2 hours. Or until they look very puffy. They should look something like this. After 2 hours of proofing, place racks on the upper and lower third positions of your oven and preheat your oven to 425 degrees Fahrenheit.
While we're waiting for our oven to preheat, in a small bowl, add in 1 egg and a pinch of kosher salt. Beat together thoroughly to make sure there are no streaks of egg white. Then brush the tops and sides of the rolls with this egg wash. Avoid brushing the ends of the rolls with egg wash, as we don't want to lock the layers of butter and prevent seeing definition.
Bake them in your preheated oven at 425 degrees Fahrenheit, 1 pan on the upper third and 1 pan on the lower third rack for 18 to 20 minutes, or until they're golden brown. Let them cool a bit before eating. These pain à l'ube rolls will keep at room temperature for 3 to 5 days, stored in an airtight container. And there it is, pain à l'ube. Golden brown, flaky, buttery puff pastry rolls from scratch with a delicious ube filling. Ang sarap.
Yum.
So good. It's like a buttery, flaky version of pan de ube.
And it's so wonderfully flaky and delicious, though impossible to not get flakes everywhere.
But totally worth it. Thank you so much for watching. Please let us know in the comment section below if you're planning to make this pain à l'ube. Send us pictures of your creations on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Links below. And if you like this video, don't forget to give us a thumbs up and subscribe to Cooking with Kurt.
And don't forget to click on the bell so you get notified when we post new cooking videos. And for our written recipes and more, be sure to check out cookingwithkurt.com. Maraming salamat!